Hello, hello, hello. Thank you for being here. Name's Kadmil, and today we want to talk a little bit about Cypherpunk and what does it mean for Ethereum now, and like basically what new steps for the network itself could look like, and how the industry we're working in changes with time. So we're welcoming Pol Lanski of DappNode, Anthony from Aragon, and Isidoros from Lido contributors. So welcome, folks. Okay. First question, I think, to everyone, starting with you, just because you're here, you're nearby. It's very late. What does Cypherpunk ethos means to you, and what do you think it should mean for Ethereum as a whole?
Right. So, thank you, and thank you for the applause before I even opened my mouth. That's very kind of you. Cypherpunk values. I think a lot of people here sort of like got drawn to Ethereum because of some kind of like cypherpunk values. There's we've had this kind of like two currents in Ethereum where it's like either degen or cypherpunk, and I think this is a false dichotomy. But we can talk about that later. I think for me, the cypherpunk values of Ethereum is to provide a neutral backend, a neutral space to generate any sort of computation, any sort of program, any sort of like stuff that might be vulnerable to censorship, to government capture. So basically, in summary, creating a decentralized computer system that's uncapturable, uncensorable. For me, this is the core of the cypherpunk values. You can run whatever you want without being able to being censored. And whatever you run on top of it, that's less of my concern and should be less like trying to censor or to police what do you put on this decentralized backend. For me, it's when it stops being cypherpunk.
Tony?
Yeah, very well said. I'd like to go like a level higher, and I think what that is actually freedom. It's freedom to do what you want to do, parameterized by code. And so there are things that fit within that freedom of what you want to do. One is to not be censored, censorship resistance, right? Another is exit per se, the ability to exit. And so it's the freedom to do what you want to do within the parameters that are set up by code. I think typically or often in the past, cypherpunk values have often been pushed forward as like either very specific to cryptography or specific to privacy. And I think those are just aspects that allow you to have the freedom that you want to do what you want to do under those parameters. So I think like privacy fits into it, censorship resistance, exit, and all these things that allow you to do what you want. For me, that's what cypherpunk is and how that is particularly aligned with Ethereum and on Ethereum.
Isidoros?
It's always difficult to go last in these kinds of panels when you have such great speakers before you. Okay, I will try to take like maybe a network lens of this question. So like Tony mentioned previously, it's all about freedom, right? So if we think about the internet, back when it was discovered and basically created in the 70s and 80s, we got very lucky that governments didn't understand how powerful it was going to be. Because if they had, they would have controlled it right away. With blockchains, I think we kind of have encountered this same issue, but almost like flipped. People immediately realize how important control of these, in theory, neutral kind of frameworks for global interaction are going to be in the future. And the reason that a cypherpunk ethos is crucial to essentially creating not only like the best platform for a decentralized financial future, but for self-sovereign individuals in an increasingly globalized system where rights are being taken away, rights are being constrained, and rights are being controlled by entities that civilians have less control over. You need basically a platform that is resistant to all of those things. And if that platform is not built on a cypherpunk ethos, it's very easily capturable by pure market desires, for example, like speed and settlement or whatever. So if you want to create a network where as many people can transact as freely as they want to in any way that they want to, it has to be built on a cypherpunk ethos. And ultimately, I think that's why Ethereum, at least if you consider it as kind of something that is like a nation as opposed to a market, is set apart from a lot of other blockchains, is because it builds these cypherpunk values into its core tenets. It is very important that it is open. It is very important that like anybody can use it, and it's very important that it is accessible by basically anyone and everyone at any point in time. And that's what makes it important. That's what makes like these values so integral to its success. There's a huge cultural and societal component to blockchains that are going to effectively re-enfranchise the participation of civilians in politics, and that's why Cypherpunk ethos is important.
So, should we separate Ethereum in two parts then? There's the sort of like the application layer and the user layer, and here what we want is to maximize freedom and accessibility. But in order for that to be possible, even if this application layer is sort of valueless because you need to be able to run whatever you want, then there's the, for lack of a better word, the infrastructure layer or the underlying layer, which needs to be really opinionated on values in order to defend the freedom of the top layer. So, and here I'm talking about this separation of values because we're seeing a lot of forces in Ethereum that push the evolution of the infrastructure layer of like how the consensus work and what type of protocols are we sidecarring to Ethereum that kind of like want to uphold other values, other priorities. Maybe they want to make it more like Solana. Maybe they want to make it faster. They want to make it more performant in some sort of way. So would it be like, would you guys agree, for example, that there's this duality on the application layer and the infrastructure layer where the application needs to be free by definition, but the infrastructure needs to be very opinionated?
I mean, from my side, yes. Or at least what you need is a current at the base layer, like you say, or the infrastructure layer that acknowledges these dynamics that maybe come as a result of the market or come as a result of like the agents that are active on the system, who all want different things, and comes up with ways to either counteract these dynamics or to augment the dynamics to ensure the freedom of the application layer on top. So that's why things like research into inclusion lists for censorship resistance, or eventually like fully encrypted mempools for on-chain privacy, or even like private transactions at the base token are really, really important, because unless you find ways to safeguard these rights at the base layer, the rights don't really end up meaning that much at the app layer.
I have a particular question to your end. What do you see as the main threats for infra layer of Ethereum? Basically, we wanted a panel about changing of situation. So what is the most dangerous in regards to cypherpunk value for infra of Ethereum?
There are market forces. There are market forces, and markets are generally good, but they have very fast information and very fast feedback. And so sometimes it might seem like Ethereum is losing. Sometimes it might seem like Ethereum is losing versus other more performant chains or chains that are pumping more the token than Ethereum is. And I think this is a big threat because it might bring people to think that we need to change the infrastructure to become more like these other chains that are becoming performant. And that's why I'm not saying any particular thing that is a threat. What I think that is what is a threat is to let ourselves be driven by this short-termism. Humans are extremely bad at recognizing tail risks or factoring in tail risks. If there's a... Huh?
I was just saying, is that it? That's all they're bad at, or?
So it could be like we could leave it here. Period. But like, if there's a probability small enough that an event will happen, if it's small enough, like in our brains, it just doesn't exist. right? And that perception might bring us to think, oh yeah, it's like Ethereum is overkill. Like all of these features of decentralization, all of these features of all of this is overkill. None of this is gonna happen. But crises do happen every time. Black swan events do happen, and people are very shocked, and a lot of people lose a lot of money, and a lot of they have rippling consequences around the entire global economy. So what I think is a threat to the infrastructure of Ethereum is to be able to forfeit some of the characteristics of Ethereum that give this resilience to tail events in exchange for whatever is into fashion at that particular moment.
Yeah, and to talk about that a little bit more, I think naturally markets tend to move towards efficiency often as humans, especially in this day and age. And that's why I think overextending on those initial values that we're discussing here, like credible neutrality, for example, is like one of the things that comes to mind the most if we're problems are going to happen to Ethereum and erode over time, losing that credible neutrality. Overextending on that, I think, is an excellent thing. I think that's good. We should overextend on ensuring Ethereum is credibly neutral. We should overextend on ensuring that it's censorship resistant, et cetera, because I think markets tend to pull it in one direction, which is the opposite direction in the short term, because there's a lot more probably short-term thinkers out there than long-term thinkers. And so I think it's fine for us to overextend on the core values, because you're basically baking in this safety mechanism, as you said, to prepare for those worst instances and those worst times. And that is actually very Cypherpunk aligned to actually do that and to overextend like that.
Another that's somewhat surprising to hear that trying to be pushing Ethereum to be faster or pushing Ethereum to be better in some regards is seen as a threat. So, why does it seem as scary and potentially a bad thing?
Yeah, that's a very good point, and I think it is because it can be a threat. If it comes making Ethereum faster, more performant, it can cost resilience and it can cost these Cypherpunk values. And personally, I'm not willing to take that risk, and that's why I'm going to fight in order to have maybe a less performant, maybe more redundant. If you're looking for efficiency, blockchains are not necessarily the best technology that you can use. The amount of terabytes of redundant information in thousands of nodes around the world, it is probably not the most efficient technology to begin with. So why are we trying to make it more efficient? Of course, at a micro level, we should be trying to make it more efficient, right? But so optimizing for things that compromise on the resilience and decentralization of Ethereum. And by the way, decentralization has a very specific meaning. Decentralization is a gradient where desirable properties emerge. And here's so if you have two machines, if you have one machine, you don't have decentralization, even if it's running a Byzantine fault tolerant protocol. It's just one machine, so you don't have decentralization. You have two machines, you have data redundancy. You have three machines, but they're in different countries, then you might be more resilient to government capture. And you have different client implementations, you're resilient to zero-day exploits on the compiler of Go, as it has happened already. The more decentralized you are, the more desirable properties emerge out of this. So compromising on this decentralization for making Ethereum faster might just not be a good trade-off in the long term.
And I see, thank you. And if this is the drive for infra layer, and we touched upon that one of the threats, one of the drivers to risks is market forces on both infra and DApp layers. Wanted to ask Anthony, do you think that market forces are a threat for up layer, and basically doesn't or does degen drives pose a threat, or how those part of community and vibes interact with each other?
Yeah, I actually do think that it is a false dichotomy to say degens and cypherpunks are completely misaligned. Actually, I think that good cypherpunk values can actually open up a space for degens to thrive. Now, where I find that we in our industry get caught up on this is, I think it's where capital is allocated, is where people get frustrated. Because I think that the cypherpunk aligned sort of projects are often underfunded, and yet they're integral in ensuring that the degens can have their fun, basically. Because and so that's where this like frustration comes from like a vibes perspective. It's like, okay, you have these great privacy projects that like just can't find funding in our industry, right? And then you have meme coins, which is like unlimited funding. And so there's this friction that gets created because one is trying to support the other to have their fun and do what they need to do, right? Which is keep that baseline and keep Ethereum itself decentralized, censorship resistant, etc. And so I can see where that frustration comes in, totally. So I think like one of the most important things we can do is to ensure that funding does get to those projects that are ensuring that the cypherpunk ethos and the alignment continues, so that we can actually have this like robust framework and this robust central like base system, so that all this app layer and whatever that entails, because we're agnostic to what that is, can thrive and bring in this mass adoption. I think that's where that like frustration comes from, and that's why there's this like pull, like we're always arguing amongst ourselves on Twitter, like and I think it's degens probably just have a little bit more fun too. So it sucks to watch other people have more fun.
Also, let's not forget, cypherpunks are outcasts. Cypherpunks were born out of doing illegal shit. So, like trying to police now, like degen stuff from the cypherpunk perspective, and trying to like put more doors into the field, right? Like that doesn't make any fucking sense. You're becoming the tyrant that you are trying to avoid. So,
ooh, hot take.
What rings surprising here is like punks like punk anything is basically something from the ground and outcasts, as you say, but like saying someone should fund punks, it sounds very surprising.
They need money too. Punks need money too.
No. Making money is one. So like here, degening like makes sense. Wanted to ask Izzy, how do you think, should Ethereum fund punking a bit, or are there better options than asking some higher authority to dedicate some funds to it?
So to a certain extent, I think it does, right? So a lot of like retroactive public goods funding is funding punks. It's funding projects that have punk ethos and punk values as like core tenets of their philosophy and the products and the spaces that they're trying to build. So you go to like a punk concert, right? And you buy a shirt, that shirt goes to funding the space. You go and you watch a punk band, like all of that money goes to the band so that they can buy a shitty van and tour the country and help you get kicked in the shins. So like, it's good for the economy and the industry to recognize that that is an important part of like the life cycle, right? So a lot of people work on things, not necessarily from like a sense of volunteerism, but mostly from an ideological perspective. And given that the market values those things in the immediate term less than it does things like speculative activity, it is, I think, very healthy for the community to develop a way to identify what are the value add propositions of all these different projects and then identify a way to fund them. So if it's retroactive grants, or if it's, I don't know, eventually like staking protocols saying that like we're gonna set aside a portion of staking rewards to try to direct it towards those things, whether that's the protocol guild, right, or other kind of like intermediary mechanisms that are more suited to figuring out and identifying what are the projects that are adding value and how they're adding value, and then using community input to kind of like filter that. I think that's a super interesting like discussion to have around the future of creating sustainable public goods infrastructure. But is it like necessary? Yes. Do I think it's contradictory? No, I don't think so at all.
I will go back to a really good song by the Spanish punk band Gatillazo, which says, "I had money, I hate money, but I get paid to play. The system uses me to divert attention." And I think it is like an inescapable reality of what we do. Like in order to fund public goods, in order to fund these cypherpunk values and defend the rights of degens to degen and of anybody else to use Ethereum as a credible neutral platform, that requires funding.
Thank you. And like market forces naturally can, as we figured, market forces can put pressure on points where you want Ethereum to be resilient. But apart from that, like one thing to obviously touch upon is regulation and governance reach into blockchains. So, being DAO expert, Anthony, do you see this like as like legal pressure as big, like as potential input to how on-chain products are structured, or and what industry response is and should be?
Yeah, that's a really good question. You definitely see regulatory and legal pressure define the way some products are created and actually more particularly offered to users, which often is not Cypherpunk aligned, for example. You know, like blocking people from the United States from being able to, or whatever country, Iran, etc., from being able to participate through the app layer, obviously is a decision that organization made to follow the practices that have been recommended to them to minimize and decrease regulatory and legal risk. And I do think in the last few years, there's definitely been like a lot of projects that have headed down that road of just compliance, basically, right? There's different ways to build your product. You can try and obfuscate things so that you necessarily can't be seen or caught, whatnot, you know, whether that be through privacy, for your product to be able to function. And then the other methodology, you know, is to obviously, is to just be compliant. And I think most projects now actually just fall into sort of a compliant methodology at the app layer. What are your thoughts on that?
There's been a massive scare campaign, right? Like there's people on jail for creating permissionless projects. So, like, is my job that important to go to jail and rot in jail and spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on my defense? Most founders would say no. I don't want to rot in jail. So there's like governments do have ways to exert pressure on founders, on people, on ideas people that are trying to bring these values, because as you guys said, the internet kind of like escaped their control and it became something that was quite negative for controlling the masses, and blockchain, they're a bit late, but they're trying, right? Like, and this is their way of trying. And I think, so here I'm going to link it with like open source and plausible deniability. Like, if you're a founder, of course you want to be compliant because you don't want to go to jail. But if you're using Ethereum as your base layer where your protocol runs, you can call that smart contract from Iran. Like, Ethereum doesn't know where you're calling that. You can buy this token from the US. You can interact with the blockchain from wherever you are. And I think this is crucially important. Like, here's where like this difference between the app layer and the infrastructure layer really becomes important. Like, yes, you can ban people, you can geo-block people on the front end that you're hosting, but Ethereum doesn't give a.
It's like a mullet.
It's like a mullet. Business in the front, part in the back.
Part in the back,
Smart
yeah.
contracts, fucking rocking it, and then the front end will like.
Yeah, and we have to take this into consideration in our organization, like a lot.
Ethereum is a mullet is probably my best take
the global
from
mullet.
DevCon.
Somebody tweet that out, please.
I'm pushing for this narrative.
So for us, it's really important, right? Because when you launch your DAO, obviously, once it's launched, it goes off, and nobody can touch it but the DAO itself, right? Who has permissions over that DAO? Well, you select who that is when you launch your DAO, whether that be token holders, whether that be a multi-sig, whether that be digital identification, whatever. So from that point of view, like, that's good for us as offering this product, because once you launch that DAO, we can no longer touch it, right? It's off and off it goes. So it can't really be censored. Nobody can try and attack that DAO in any way from the deployer side, from the Aragon side, right? And that's by design. That's super important. Then you get into the conversation of like, okay, at the app level, like when we're providing like a no-code solution from like a scalable perspective for people to launch their DAOs. Okay, this is where and most front ends aren't decentralized, right? And this is where you can start to get, obviously, into a place where you can have, governments or whatnot actually censor people at the front app level and stop you from doing that. And so then what's the next stage for that? Okay, often we have DAOs. And I don't think yet, I think it's due to like a few things. One is the lack of proper tooling. I think we've struggled to get flexible tooling out there for DAOs to actually like govern themselves the way they should. And we've had this regression in actually decentralized, decision-making and DAOs themselves that are like truly decentralized, which could have been another methodology to combat censorship resistance. And that's another thing that we sort of need to continue to work on. And so we definitely want, when we're making these product decisions, if we're not going to have a super decentralized front end, well then can we be decentralized on the ownership of that front end at least, so that it can't be stopped so easily. And there's just so many product decisions to make in this way to avoid legal complexity, regulatory complexity. And I think we need to be more thoughtful about it.
If I can add something to this, and just to like take us off chain in terms of like a way to think about this question. So these are all things that we can do from a software perspective to help with compliance or to navigate the complexities of compliance. But I think there's like two things that we can do that fall outside software. And it's centered like around like people and efforts. So the primary thing, in my opinion, is education. And the second thing is adoption, which drives the impetus for education. Compliance in like the traditional world has been built to solve issues of opaqueness in systems. In blockchains, you have full transparency. Now, if eventually we have things like fully private transactions, et cetera, we can like talk about different ways to solve that. But essentially, we are taking a malformed tool that's based on the precedent of how systems used to work and trying to apply it to the way that the new systems work. And if you do that, you get really, really negative outcomes. The only way that we can, well, not the only way, but for me, one of the most effective ways that so far as an industry we have not been great at is to help governments understand like these new tools and how you can achieve something like compliance using the benefits and unique properties of these tools that didn't exist in traditional systems infrastructure. And one of the best ways to get support to do that is through advocacy of people that actually use this. So if you get adoption, then people will go to their governments and we will say, hey, I'm using this tool, it's great for me and my life, it provides value, update your regulations to kind of match the new reality of how the world works, as opposed to trying to impose like these archaic and arcane mechanisms on top of something that can give you exactly what you want and easier than all of these weird things that you're setting up. And we really need to lean into like the power and agency of people and like groups of people and advocacy to do something like that.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there. One of the most important things we can do is have real world use cases, get those out as fast as we can, get people using it as fast as you can, and then policymakers have to almost fall in line at that point. If their child is using this technology in a positive way and they see that every day, they're going to actually viscerally understand what is being used, what the benefits are, and then can make better decisions.
He might even launch a token on Aave,
Absolutely.
I think most would hate it to the core. Like, do your parents like you playing video games?
We'll see.
I wanted to ask, while government pressure could be seen and kind of well understood on app layer, so you basically see that governance, as you put it, chase after front ends, chase after visible founders and whatnot. I wanted to ask, do you see government reach to infra layer? Because it's less. I feel like it's less talked about and it's less visible at very least.
So for sure, you see it. Already, you even see it in a way that is like indirect. So obviously we have this this OFAC sanctions list, right? So in the Treasury Department, there's like another sub-department that decides to sanction persons or entities globally and basically says, if you're a US person or an entity that has US presence, you're not allowed to interact with these people that are on this list. There's no guidance for how to use this. And already we've come up with this term. Like we do this in crypto all the time where we misapply like terms and like run with them. But anyway, we've come up with like what relays are OFAC compliant or not. Like the Treasury Department hasn't even disclosed what you should do to be compliant. But like merely the fact that this thing exists, that this artifact exists, has forced operators who operate from that country or perhaps do business in the US or have customers in the US to change their operations potentially, or at least think about how to change their operations to conform to this. So that is like soft power. From a hard power perspective, we saw this when China banned Bitcoin mining and the effects that that had on the market. I think we will increasingly see attempts by governments or like jurisdictional alliances to control more and more aspects of the network. And that is why what Tony said, which is like we should over-index on the cypherpunk ethos right now. Because if you don't over-index now, it might be way too late to do it later, and like that's not a problem you can solve. So yeah.
There's a couple of talks at DevCon about how to give privacy to validators, because right now everything on Ethereum is you're using, if you're a solo staker, you're using your public IP, and just by crawling the network, you can see who is running a validator. And that is okay for now, but it might not be in the future. So I'm afraid that we're not building systems that are able to resist an actual order of like, hey, you stop, or we're gonna come to your house and we're gonna stop this machine for you. Of course, again, tail risk, very low chance of probability of this to happen, but our system needs to be able to resist this if it happens.
Yeah, privacy in general, I think we just haven't done a good enough job of ensuring privacy on the blockchain. Like we've created all these other great things: censorship resistance, transparency, permissionlessness, exit, etc. And privacy is super challenging to build. I mean, we spent years trying to build private voting and still don't have like a really great scalable solution. And it's a huge, huge, huge blind spot that I think only a few people are talking about, and I think it actually is going to become a huge problem if we don't figure that out. And I think actually you need it even for mass adoption. So I think you need it for multiple things as well. It's not just like obfuscation. Like you actually need it as well for mass adoption.
And about mass adoption, and basically what you're working on from day to day, I wanted to ask, and do a round, sorry about it again. What do you do, and what your project does for maintaining and pushing Cypherpunk on Ethereum forwards? So,
what are you doing, Izzy?
I mean, yeah, talk about CSM DVT. Like this is Cypherpunk. This is Cypherpunk right here, like big time.
So yeah, so thank you. Welcome to the Lido conference. Let me talk about Lido. My job is to try to like shepherd, I guess, node operators and work with the Lido community to help build a protocol that enfranchises as many people to participate in staking on Ethereum at scale. That scale is like something that we always add at the end, but I think it really matters. If you create a decentralized protocol, but it only works at like 1 to 5% of total Ethereum staked, it's not strong enough to guarantee the resilience of the network. You need something that can work from 20 to 80%. And I'm not saying we'll go to 80%, and there's discussions around whether that's good for the network or not, and like we should be having those discussions. But the system should be able to do that, just the same way that Ethereum should be able to hold like the totality of DeFi in it, if that's what we want to build. If we want to build the economic layer of the future, then we're essentially saying that it's safe enough to put it on Ethereum, then it should be safe enough to run like on the validator set of Ethereum. The mission started with basically finding a way to prevent market capture by uber centralized actors, and has now like morphed, although that was always the original idea, into enfranchising participation by as many people as possible. So like Tony said, in February, the simple DVT module came out. It was the first fully fledged actual like usage of DVT on Ethereum mainnet that used also DKG, so decentralized key generation, which means that like no one party can actually fully reconstitute the key, and since we're running clusters of 7, it takes 4 parties to do so. And actually, the consensus on this specific DVT implementation is 5 of 7. And it was the first time that professional node operators and solo stakers and community stakers were actively working together to run tens, and now, as of like a couple of weeks ago, hundreds of validators together. There's no other protocol that's currently doing that. And with the launch of CSM, which basically follows in the footsteps of really amazing solo-based delegated staking platforms on Ethereum, you know, like Rocket Pool. Like Lido is now offering the ability for anybody that has 2.4 or less ETH to participate in running a validator and decentralizing the network. It's in early adoption mode right now, so if you're a likely solo staker and you're in one of these lists, you can see if you're eligible. If not, I'm guessing that sometime around Q1, when the community wants it, there will be a vote to make it truly permissionless. And for me, the future of Lido is how to scale modules like CSM and SimpleDVT to eventually be almost the majority, if not like the clear majority of total stake through Lido. And so you will see the curated set getting smaller, or at least evolving to have more permissionless and like more risk-friendly components, and the permissionless components of the Lido validator set drastically increasing over the next couple of years.
Cool. Thanks for introducing the CSM, because it gives me a really good segue into responding to your question. So at DappNode we do work at the infrastructure layer, hardcore infrastructure layer. We help people run nodes and validators from home, and we take care of all the, well, we help you take care, because there's some misunderstanding here. Some people think that we run nodes, but actually what we do is we do an operative system that you can run at home in your machine, and it gives you this nice UI where you point and click and you deploy Ethereum nodes, Gnosis Chain nodes, and you can deploy validators for SimpleDVT, validators for the Lido CSM module. So we help anybody, regardless of their technical ability, to be able to participate. And I think this is crucial for the mass adoption of the infrastructure layer, right? Like the more people is able to run nodes and validators, the lesser the technological barriers to run nodes and validators, the more people are going to run it in a decentralized manner. If there's too much friction, people are just not going to run it. If there's not too much friction, if it's very easy, just by understanding what Ethereum is and whether I want to collaborate with its decentralization or not, you don't need to be technical. You can use a tool like DappNode to just deploy easily nodes and validators. And before you used to, like, running nodes didn't used to be so exciting or so attractive, because there was not only the technical barrier to it, there was a huge economic barrier as well. You needed 32 ETH to run a validator. But initiatives like SimpleDVT or CSM, which builds on Rocket Pool and other things, you actually need 2.5 for the first validator on CSM. And for SimpleDVT, to participate in a cluster, you need to pass a testnet, but you actually need no bond. There's literally no economic barrier to being a node operator for Lido. And Lido provides this liquidity, provides this ETH that you seem to have like an infinite pool of, and puts this ETH into your home, into your DappNode, into validating into your DappNode and giving you revenue for it. So it's pretty exciting.
And just a really quick add, sorry. If you're interested in potentially getting one of these DappNode Nooks, Lido and DappNode work together on a really, really gorgeous machine. There will be, I think, 2 or 3 given out today at a raffle and like a trivia quiz thing. So definitely check your agendas. It's going to be on the decentralization stage to try to pick one up.
I just realized how cute it is, how old and battered and weather-torn all 3 of our organizations are. We've been around, all of us, for a long time, and circularly work together, right? Which is cute too. Like you guys are helping you, DappNode are helping secure the network with both of you, which DAOs require. You cannot have a DAO without like, you know, an unstoppable system. And then we're giving you a DAO, and it must be Cypherpunk. Like, so it's sort of cute. We've all been around a long time, and you can tell that all 3 organizations are sort of definitely thinking about scalability and how important that is, right? We've been around long enough to like see all of our mistakes from the past and see where we need to go into the future to take this to that next level, because we realize, like, not just the TAM, but like we need more people. We need a lot more people to secure this network and to participate in the network. And so for us, being also around and being able to look back to 2017 and see, like, for us, we provide on-chain governance tooling, right, for organizations. Lido being the biggest DAO in the industry, securing the most, assets and and on our older stack, and we've been able to look back and say, okay, like how can we make DAO tooling and on-chain governance tooling more flexible and more future-proof, right? More scalable, that more people can use it. Because right now, basically, you just have a cookie-cutter situation. Like 99% of DAOs, if they are DAOs at all, are just like, taking a copy-paste solution, and I don't think it's working for most people, right? And it's certainly not scalable. Like, the DAOs that can build custom, that have the resources to do that. It's a lot of resources to run a DAO, right? Especially even on the technological side, have to fork these factories, have to rebuild all the code logic. Then you're sort of stuck in this gigantic code logic. And so we've been like focusing and working on like, okay, how can we make this more modular? How can we make it more scalable so that projects like, can come in tomorrow and then like take a Lido build and be able to just not even fork that, like just plug it into their DAO and be able to go and run an organization and then to change how they want, because like what organization doesn't change over time, right? And so we need to make it easier for those organizations to do that. So that's what we do, is we ensure that organizations can run and manage themselves on chain, their assets, their protocol, and just as we're saying here, like we're working on making this with our new protocol OSX, although it's not new anymore, but much more scalable, much more modular, which is what organizations need to actually function. So so still adorable that we're all up here, still in the war zone, working together.
Thank you. We're at time. Thank you so much for Cypherpunking today and for the whole work you're doing. So,
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Leuts.